G'day. Welcome to the AgriCoach podcast for families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. Welcome back to the AgriCoach Wealth and Wisdom podcast, where we're all about aligning families, growing wealth, and protecting legacies. I'm your host, Ben Law, the financial bloke, and today's episode is one I've been looking forward to sharing with everyone for quite some time. If you've ever wondered why so many farming families struggle with succession planning, or as my guest today calls it, farm transitions, well, you're not alone. Successfully handing down the family farm isn't just about having more money, more acres, more breeders, etc. In reality, it's about building harmony and understanding across the generations so everyone can move forward together. It's about strengthening your balance sheet and your family relationships. My guest today is Elaine Froese, Canada's renowned farm family coach. For over 3 decades, Elaine has dedicated herself to helping farming families talk openly, resolve conflict, and create clear, actionable plans for transitioning land, farming leadership, and ultimately the family's wealth. She's a professional coach, a conflict resolution expert, a gifted speaker, and the long-time columnist behind one of Canada's leading farm publications. Elaine is also the host of the Farm Family Harmony podcast, where she offers practical insights on communication, fairness, and sustainable farm planning, no matter where you're located in the world. In our conversation, we'll explore why more money doesn't necessarily mean more family harmony, the importance of setting expectations early, and how to break through the cultural barriers of conflict avoidance. Elaine will share powerful strategies for fostering honest conversations, for preparing the next generation for both business and family leadership, and also on ensuring everyone's well-being, whether that be financial or otherwise. Whether you're currently working side by side with family on your property, or you're busting your guts to ensure your kids have the ability or the opportunity to carry on your legacy, this episode will provide you with the tools to think differently about the future of your family business. So grab a cuppa, find a quiet spot, and get ready to learn from one of the best in the business. So without further delay, welcome, Elaine.
Great to be here, Ben.
I'm super excited. So this has been one of those things. You're in Canada. I know we just compared backgrounds. Yours is inches of snow, I suppose you'd say. I think you're on the metric system. There's a snowball, lots of snow over there. We were just talking about we have had a pool party where 6 o'clock in the morning and it's sort of 26 degrees already. So complete contrast.
And that's good. Different is not wrong. It's just different.
So where I want to kick off with, Elaine, I've been a fan for quite a while watching, you've got a podcast, Farm Family Harmony, but for everyone listening, can you just give us a little bit of a background on yourself and your family and what you do with yourself these days?
So I'm married to Wes Froese, my farming husband. We have a 5,000-acre certified seed farm. We've been married for 43 years. I grew up on a farm right next door to Winnipeg in the center of Canada with cattle and learned to drive a combine with my dad. And then I got a degree in home economics, which doesn't even exist anymore, but it's about the quality of family life. And then I moved to southwestern Manitoba to Boissevain, which is where we live now. But I didn't know West then. And Boissevain is just mile 16 above the U.S. border of North Dakota. And in this time, Ben, I was way back in 1993 asked by the government when I was a young mom to go to kitchen tables with a flip chart to help farm families talk about their future plan for the transition of the farm, because they recognized that that's something that I was good at and helping people feel comfortable. So started doing that work per diem, and then back in 2003 decided that I needed to crystallize my work and became an executive coach with the Hudson Institute of Santa Barbara in California. And at the same time did a whole 22 days of training in conflict resolution and mediation, and used this idea of coaching. I coined the term farm family coach, which is what my business is called. And I now have a team of 5 coaches, and our goal and our strategy is to help families come to the table to talk, to get clarity of expectation and understanding of timelines and agreements in order to have harmony in their family farms. And so farm family coaching is something I've been doing for over 30 some years. And I was also gifted the opportunity to write in a farm paper called Grain News. And next March will be my 30th anniversary. So I'm old enough to be your mom.
Only just.
Or just. I have 3 beautiful grandchildren, and my son has just turned 36 yesterday. And he runs Boys of Ain Select Seeds, which is our certified seed cleaning business. And my husband is stepping back without stepping away. So he's still farming actively with our son, and they now have a joint venture partnership. And it's a beautiful thing. And I'm very thankful to have a daughter-in-law and grandchildren living right next door. And I'm also thankful that you and I can have this talk to encourage not only the families in Australia, but anybody who's listening to this in South Africa or the UK or Scotland or America. And I am committed to helping families find harmony through understanding. So that's my journey. And I also love to play with my kids and also volunteer at my church. And I'm very also interested in mental health and women's well-being as entrepreneurs. So just very thankful for the life that I've been given in terms of my speaking and my writing and my coaching.
It's an amazing story. It's interesting. I did a 2-day workshop last week with 7 families here on the coast. And one of the things that I admitted to was the fact that I'd spent 20 odd years as a financial advisor helping families grow, protect and transition wealth. And I consistently had this understanding early in my career that more money would equal more harmony, because that was the background I had in my farm. If there was more money in the system, that would make life all easier and then everyone would get along like a house on fire. But unfortunately, I figured out at a very early age that more money does not equal more harmony.
Right. And often when I'm speaking, Ben, in front of audiences, there's a wonderful book by John Ortberg called The Life You've Always Wanted. And his thesis, which is also mine, is when I die, I want to be rich towards God and rich in relationship. And so you can have all the net worth and all the cattle stations and all the things, but if you don't have richness in relationship, in my world, that's not a very wealthy thing. And Ralph Waldo Emerson had another saying, and his saying was, your health is your wealth. And I have a friend that tomorrow is going for a cancer biopsy in her lungs, and I'm just really hoping for a good outcome for her. And again, doesn't matter how much money you have, it can't buy good health either.
I'm not sure if I heard this on your podcast, Elaine, or someone else, but they said you should always ask yourself, if you want to be wealthy, what do you actually want to be wealthy in? And if it was you, thank you, because I took it and stole it. But I think that's a really good way of looking at it, because so many people go, I want to be wealthy. And it's like, well, what do you actually want to be wealthy in?
Because you have your financial background, Ben, I also want to tell you about another podcast called Money Made Simple by my friend Bruce Sellery. And his website is moolala.ca. And his book is called Moolala, Why Smart People Do Dumb Things with Their Money. And Bruce will ask the question, what does money mean to you? And for us in our stage of life, it means freedom and generosity. But for my son, Ian, it means debt payments, right? Because he has a land mortgage payment to pay. He's paying off his new seed plant. The business is paying off his father for purchasing that part of the business. So money means different things to different people. And in our family coaching group practice, we use the 3-circle model with family, management, and ownership. And, I didn't bring my baby rings with me, but usually I hold up these 3 interlocking links like we would use to a stroller to attach things to your kid's stroller. And, I was just in a family meeting this week where I had to get them to draw 3 circles on their paper, and they kept bouncing back between family and between what they wanted to see happening in the farm. And they were grieving because the dad had just passed away not that long ago. But I think it really helps our listeners to understand that what is the system that you want to protect or work on. And I'm more geared towards what's happening in the family because of my training as a home economist and quality of life things. But I want everyone in the family to have success. And fairness in agriculture, as you know, is getting harder and harder with huge land values and costs of assets and things. And so I have a whole workshop I do called Finding Fairness in Farm Transition, because fairness to me is how do you help everyone in your family be successful? And in our family, our daughter cannot work. She's early 40s and cannot work because of a mental health condition that she has to navigate. And then, you have another person who, like my son, who's running a multi-million-dollar business because that's the opportunity he was able to grab onto. So when I'm speaking, I really want people to understand everybody's journey is different and there's no cookie cutter approach. And in Canada, I call it the Roundup solution because we use Roundup here to get wild oats and herbicide control kind of stuff. And there is no one right path for everybody. And I think that's why the work you do in Australia and the work we do is so important, because it's an unfolding of finding out what's going to work for that particular family. And so for people listening to this today, I don't want you to be sick. I don't want you to be deflated or disappointed or frustrated. I was just writing an email to one of our members from our membership site this morning. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. And I'm wired for positivity. So I want people to see that they have choices and that the path forward is hopeful and that their longings will be fulfilled, man. That's what we're about.
It's interesting. Someone said to me the other day, Elaine, at the workshop, we were talking about this whole fairness and this ultimate, well, I know you call it farm transition. Quite often here in Australia, you'll hear it called succession planning. But one of the key factors in that is forgiveness, because of so many families, get to the point where you just can't back down, and this whole fairness. And we had the whole conversation that sometimes if family is important and you want to be rich in family, there has to be a high level of forgiveness and a willingness to move on from things and try and get the best for everyone involved. Do you find that quite often happens?
Yes, and I actually have a very close friend going through that right at the moment with an aging father overseas. And things have not been handled well, but they have decided that richness in relationship and preserving the relationship and letting go of what financial gain may or not be lost, the relationship is more important than the money. And for some people, that's not the case, Ben. And I have a webinar on greed and entitlement, because the green monster, which is greed, is alive and well all over the world, right? Because people have expectation that money will make them happier. Or on the backside of that, we have farmers who are in their 60s who haven't paid attention to what they should have done in their 30s, which is start to build personal financial liquidity on the personal side, not just within the farm or the cattle station, right? When I'm doing my workshops, and this might be helpful for the listeners, is I get them to draw a huge cross, and on the left-hand side, write farm assets, and on the right-hand side, write personal wealth. And I'm sitting in front of you right now of a beautiful painting that my brother gave me for my 65th birthday. And he's a very generous brother, but we're also able to enjoy things because we made decisions not to put everything in the farm business. And that's the hard part for young people listening to this, is saving is not part of their mental financial focus, and waiting. They want, Amazon Prime is a good example of people's inability to wait for things, right? And Instagram is called Instagram for a reason, or Instacart. They have all these instant things. So I think that families need to find fairness when what you're talking about entitlement or forgiveness. The question that we like to ask is, what do you truly want? And most moms who come to me say, Elaine, I want my family to be happy getting together for Christmas. And as we're taping this today, Ben, it's American Thanksgiving today. And on this day, it's more popular even I think in America than Christmas is, but families have huge expectation. And it's managing and not keeping that expectation in your head, but being able to come together at the table and speak what that is, so that you can say, well, I'd love to do that for you, Charlie, but that's not a workable expectation with this farm. This is workable, but this is not. And to have the courage and the conviction that you can talk about what the financial reality is, because again, the moms and dads listening to this, they need to take care of themselves first financially, because the next generation has time on their side to grow their wealth, hopefully.
And for a lot of families who really care about their family, that's a really tough one to do. There's almost a guilt or an embarrassment about, well, we need to provide for our financial retirement and be protected. And then watching your kids take on debt, work hard, have their own children and do it tough. And many of them I see find a lot of guilt around protecting themselves.
Well, and guilt is an interesting concept, because I don't live from any kind of guilt. And the expression I've heard around that, Ben, is that the tickets for the guilt train have all been purchased, so there's none left. So just let that go, right? And so Brene Brown, who's another great podcaster, she would say, what is the story you're telling yourself? And a lot of older farmers tell themselves that they need to pay down all the debt first. Well, I had a 75-year-old who had $5 million of debt. And I said, Charlie, it's not going to happen. Here's the reality check. And then talking about what is good debt and bad debt and having financial literacy. Like my daughter-in-law grew up in the city. And she said, Mom, why do people stop talking to me when they find out I came from the city? I said, well, that's because they're judging you. She said, what? And they're making preconceived assumptions. Well, you don't know anything about farming because you come from the city. Well, guess what? She's a blank slate and she has great opportunity to be put into a culture that's a healthy family farm culture and to learn about, short-term and intermediate and long-term debt. And I just had to sit down with her one day and explain to her how their land mortgage worked. And then once she understood, then it was fine. But we make assumptions all the time, Ben, and I think often in Canada, I say conflict avoidance and procrastination is killing agriculture. And I know it is in Australia as well, because people just keep putting things off. And they say after Thanksgiving, after Christmas, after Easter, after school holiday, whatever. And then a whole year has gone by and nothing has been dealt with.
Yeah, we say that's a job for Ron, later Ron.
Oh, okay.
And we hate Ron. Ron's not a nice bloke. And so that's the thing. Like, yeah, I see exactly the same thing, Elaine. And what happens is there becomes this high level of frustration. And now one of the things, Elaine, that I absolutely love about my job is I get to work with a lot of really driven entrepreneurial families that are really motivated and driven, but they do avoid conflict in agriculture, absolutely. But a common challenge that I actually seen in this farm transition or succession space is it always becomes a not right now problem. That's a job for later, as we just sort of ducked into. Now, number one, it's usually because they don't know the answers, but a lot of the time it's because they've still got this fire in their belly to achieve and in many ways aren't ready to have the discussion about the future, especially when I think people should be starting to think about farm transition and preparation. And there's three things I suggest people need to do is they need to prepare themselves. So the current generation need to start preparing themselves. So thinking about building what we call off-farm assets or that liquidity you mentioned before so they can retire. They've got to start preparing the business, the agribusiness, to be able to transition leadership. And they've got to prepare the next generation to be able to take over that business and also manage wealth and also lead the family. But what happens is quite often that's a job for later. I'm not ready to do this. We don't need to. And my personal opinion is between 45 and 55 is the absolute sweet spot when you should be thinking about preparing everyone for this ultimate journey 5 to 15 years away. But we see so much resistance in families to actually do this. And I've got some thoughts about why. But do you see this in Canada alone, or do you see this? And why is there such a massive resistance against getting started early and doing it properly, especially amongst highly motivated farm leaders?
Well, I used to use those little clickers, Ben, that you hold in your hand so you could do real-time polling in your audience. So I have all kinds of answers for you. So the first one that pops in my head is, we're too busy.
Yes.
Too busy, are you? Oh, and I know that the distances are great in Australia because I've been to Adelaide and I've been to the South Australia and the Clare Valley. But regardless, if somebody dies or if somebody's in great need, you will drop everything and go to the funeral or go and help, right? So we always make choices for what's important. And in Canada, a study showed in Ontario farmers that they didn't have well-written wills or wills at all because they thought or were in their mindset that if they wrote a will, they would die. Like, that's crazy, right?
My clicker's full as well on that.
Right. So then there's this whole thing about people's mindset that if I do this, then automatically this will happen. Another barrier is what you mentioned previous is people are afraid of fighting. And again, it's a mindset shift. And I wish I had magic dust that I could just sprinkle on people. But the magic dust that we use in our practice is called the conflict dynamic profile. So we have a tool that was developed by Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida, that we're certified to use that will help folks, Ben, find out how good are you at expressing emotion. I'm really frustrated, or I'm disappointed, or this hurts, or I can't seem to let this go. So expressing emotion, creating solutions, reaching out, adapting, and creating solutions. But the last piece is putting yourself in the other person's shoes. So my husband's had 3 crash ups in his pickup. He's actually not a bad driver, but he tends to drive like this, like most farmers do. And when my farmer starts driving like this, I say, pull over, I'll drive, you look at the crops. So he had a really bad crash up 7 years ago when Ian was just in his early 30s or just nicely turning 30. And you don't want to have succession or transition planning precipitated by a tragedy or an incident or a heart attack or cancer and all those other things. And way back with Country Guide, I said, you can start working on transition when your kids are toddlers because it's the culture of your farm, Ben. It's how you see the future. Is the future positive? Are we all aligned to work as a team? Do we like challenge? Have we been able to manage risk? So your culture of your farm is what you believe to be true, how you behave with each other. So it's believe, behave, and then the third piece is decide. And when Wes had his last crash up in 2017 in the middle of soybean harvest, Ian, our son, automatically quickly got thrust into management while his father was in the hospital bed in our living room for 3 months with 13 fractured ribs. It wasn't good. The good news is he survived and he's still actively farming with our son. So people can have all kinds of excuses. So what if you didn't see conflict as something to be avoided, but something that would give you clarity? How good would it be to sit around a table with you, Ben, when you're age 45 to start mapping out this plan or this path of what you all want and by when? And I don't have my little cardboard sign today, but I have a sign I use that says by when ? By when, Elaine and Wes, do you want to move off the farm? So we declared 2020, but that all got mucked out in 2017. And then my daughter-in-law said, well, actually, I want to break your half-mile rule and I don't want to move. And so then she said, I want to build a new house, which is what they did. So another barrier, I said, too busy to plan. I said, conflict avoidance. The next one is complexity and overwhelm. And you and I know, Ben, it's not just about the finances. Finances are number one in terms of income stream for the founders, good compensation for the next gen so they can grow and pay down debt. And then sometimes in Alberta and other provinces, we even have grandparents. So we have not one generation, but we have 3. And I know in Australia, this is true too. You have 3 generations, right?
Absolutely.
So if it's overwhelming, just think of these 3 words: income stream, housing, fairness. I have just given you a succession transition plan in Canadian language.
Simple is good.
Yes, and clear is kind. Being clear is kind, and that's a Brene Brown saying. I'm sorry that you want to have a brand new house. We can't afford it. Housing does not make us money. We're going to put the money into a new irrigation system or tile drainage or something to make the land more productive. And in Australia, we watch your weather. You're either droughting or flooding, or, there's all kinds of risk management to happen. But what are you doing to protect the resiliency of the family? And that's what you do in culture, is you treat each other well. And when you have conflict, you resolve it, you make repair, and you create solutions, and you attack the problem, not the person. So the thing with transition planning too, Ben, is when is transition planning done?
You usually, in many of the cases, it's in the cattle yards or when everyone's under pressure because no one wants to talk about it, and it comes out at the worst possible time and turns into an argument.
I should have used better English. When is transition planning finished?
My personal opinion, I don't think it ever is, because as soon as you have the children born, then the grandkids are born. And I know we talked with Artie and Casey Lord about how the greatest role the grandparents can play in this whole process is to start preparing the grandkids.
And I absolutely agree. Because I just got a letter in my email box this week of where my cemetery plot is going to be. I was always told by my mother-in-law that there was space for me right beside her, which was not a bad thing. And so this week I picked out 2 different plots, and then I asked, how much do these cost? So why I'm sort of playing with you here is, when is transition planning done? It ends when you pass, when you die. But that then becomes your estate plan. And so here's where the anxiety and overwhelm is, Ben. I am most concerned about lifestyle, about people having enough money to live the way they want to live, and communication and conflict resolution. Those are the lanes that we spend the most time in Farm Family Coach. And we don't do the financial planning. We ask financial planners to do that because that's their lane. But if you look at all the different kinds of plans that are part of a succession, there's communication, there's conflict resolution, there's lifestyle, there's insurance, there's the legal, there's the accounting, there's the debt, there's the business planning vision, and then there's the exit strategy. And I don't like the word retirement. I rarely use it.
It's like a black snake in our place.
Yes, exactly. Or the tarantula. What we say is, in the words of Dick Whitman, who's one of my most highly esteemed farm management planners in America at whitmanconsulting.com, Dick says, why don't we talk about what it looks like to step back without stepping away? And that to me is a beautiful phrase, because everybody still has value and purpose and meaning as they age in place on their station or their ranch or their farm. And then my role as a coach is to draw that out. Charlie, what does a good day look like to you in the outback? And then Charlie says, Elaine, I don't know. And I go, I know, Charlie, because you've never had a good talk with yourself. So start there. And then we have to bring Jane into the conversation because she's ready to roll to town. And Charlie says, no way, man, I'm staying here. And so then you have a disconnect between the spouses at any age, whether it's in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. But when it's in the 70s, I look at him and I say, when is it her turn to get what she needs? And then he looks at me and he says, Elaine, you are so fired.
Aren't you on my side?
No, there's no sides here. It's about facilitating robust conversations to seek harmony through understanding the other person's perspective. And that's a positive conflict behavior. Where is this written that this has to be hard, Ben? Where was that written?
You've worked bloody hard to build a profitable, scalable and well-run operation. But now, as your children are finishing their education and starting to take an interest in the family business, you're realising it's time to shift focus. It's no longer just about farm prosperity. It's now about family prosperity. You need to align your family, start preparing the next generation, improve communication and strengthen family relationships. Now, of course, that's easier said than done. And that's why we created the High Performing Families Workshop, to guide families through this crucial transition. Want to know more? Head over to www.agricoach.com.au/take action. Now, let's head back to the episode.
Well, but when people aren't given the skills, I think, Elaine, is if you're not given the skills to be able to resolve this, and I usually find most of the families that I've worked with over the years, especially the driven ones in the more remote locations, they're very much rugged individualists, is what I call them, which is they're a jack of all trades. They're very resilient. They're very single-minded. They're very, very robust and will get these things done. And this doesn't require talking. This requires action. And as soon as you're talking, you're wasting time.
And that, again, is a polarity. So a polarity is a problem. And Barry Johnson was the trainer that I had in Hudson on this. He has a great book. A polarity is a problem that is never resolved. It just has to be managed. So we like to work and make money and have our farms grow, but our bodies are not machines. So we need to have some time for rest and renewal and play. We like change to happen, but we like to navigate it. So we need to plan. Oh no, planning involves talking, but we can't spend all our time talking because we actually have to focus and execute, which is what good business people do. And you're working with your perfect clients, Ben, because you're working with 15 farm or 20 farm families that actually love what they do and want to get better and want to take advice. There's another problem. These robust, in Alberta, we call them rednecks. They're people who don't want anybody's advice and they don't want to ask for help. But how's that going for them? Not well.
So, Elaine, one of the things that I've noticed is that when we get to early 50s is probably a yardstick for me. And what quite often happens is mums will pop their head up out of life and start looking around is a good example. So the kids have usually finished school. So they've gone off to boarding schools, what we call it here in Australia, where they travel to the city to go to school. They've finished their school. They might have gone through university and finished, and they've started their own way in the world. And all of a sudden, mum and dad sort of look around and go, gee, we've got some more mental capacity at this stage. And mum will pop up and say, you know what? Our kids are starting to talk about coming back to the farm, or we know they're going to in the next 3 or 4 years. They might even be starting to ask some questions. What's the future look like, mum and dad? What are you doing? What's in it for us? And usually what happens is mum is really concerned about family dynamics. We don't want to end up in this dust up like we've seen plenty of other people, or they've had a bad experience in their life or a less than ideal. And quite often I find that dad's in what I call the acceleration phase. They've hit their 50s, they've got debt down or they've leveraged up, they're driving ahead. It's in that acceleration phase and they're making hay while the sun's shining. And of course, mum says we need to do something. Dad says, that's for later. I haven't got time. I'm too busy sawing this tree down. You know, if mums are looking at this saying, hey, we need to take some action now, we need to start investing some time, what's some practical ways they can get dad to sit down and go, you know what, we need to look at this now, not leave it till a later?
So putting things off, as we know, is a choice. But what you've just described, Ben, I think there was a fellow from Exeter in the UK who had a study, calls it the successor effect. So if you have for sure one of those kids from boarding school and ag college coming back to the farm or the station, how do you know for sure they're coming back? And have they declared their commitment to come back? In Canada, I say, and how many families can this farmer support? So there's a viability question too around, whether or not that can happen. So farm management specialists here used to say you need $500,000 in gross sales extra for everybody who comes back. And I think the number might be north of 850,000 now. But whatever that number is, it's going to take more money to support another family, correct? So there's the whole economic discussion. And I think dads should be fairly transparent on the numbers and know what his benchmarks are. So you could start with a financial discussion with your financial advisors, your accountant, and your financial planner, and just see where you're at in terms of the profitability and viability of the business. So that's the economic equation. But the emotional equation is, what does mom want? And is she wanting to stay at Grand Central Station? Or is she given her bit, like I said earlier, has she given Charlie her best 40 years or her best 50 years, and now she wants to have a different life? Because in our coaching training at Hudson, I have this famous map that I show it every time I speak called the age and task map. In your 20s, Ben, it's about independence. In your 30s, it's about mastering success. But in your 40s, it's about having security and recognition, because by the time you're 40, you need to own equity. You need to be building your own equity because you have young children likely and you need to have your own path. But in your 50s, which is what you're talking about, it's about the quality of life as well. So dad's driving, he's got his head down, he's making money, he's loving it, and he's too busy. Wrong answer. Because if he turned his head around, and the practical tip I would give here is for the man or woman coming back from college in Australia back to the home station or ranch or farm, I would write mom and dad a letter with a 1-page business plan and saying, dear mom and dad, I'd like to thank you for all the opportunity you've given me. It's been great to be at college, but I can't wait to get back. I have new ideas of what I'd like to do in our business, but I want to do them with you. And I also want you to have some time to enjoy the fruit of your labor. So here's the question, Ben. We have young people wanting to come back and don't want their parents to feel like they're being pushed and shoved off the farm. But there's reticence in having that face-to-face conversation because the next gen is afraid of looking like they're greedy or they're entitled. And that's not their intent. So that's another conflict skill. They write in the letter, my intent, mom and dad, is not to push you off the station, but my intent is to get clarity as to what my income streams will be, what yours will be, and that you will have the life you've always wanted, and that we can grow this business together. And if not together, can I have an enterprise that's under the umbrella of yours? Okay. So again, mom might not be getting traction with her spouse, but she will get traction with the next gen to help guide them in communicating in a different way, Ben. Because you said, well, walking across to the barn or the station or whatever, that's where a lot of these conversations happen. And I had a young farmer say, Elaine, being on this farm is like being in a conversation that never ends because nothing is ever decided. And they have no agreement. They have no operating agreement. Like in our farm, way back in 1981, we had an operating agreement. We weren't incorporated yet, but there was a written agreement that 60% of the income would go to the parents, 40% would go to West Elaine. Then it became 50-50. And then the magical day in June of 1992, it became 100% West Elaine and 0% to his parents. That didn't happen by accident, Ben.
Good planning.
Yeah, but it wasn't hard planning. It was only 3 or 4 formalized business meetings with a really good facilitator who was also an accountant who was trusted by my father-in-law. And so that's the other thing. There's this thing called anticipatory worry or catastrophic thinking. And I think farmers, they have these little devilish, these wind things that go through your farm that stir up all the dust. And they get in coaching, we call it a downward spiral, or they dwell on what's negative rather than opening up and saying, I'm having some problems understanding what the solutions might be here. You also talked about leadership. And that man who's got his head down, who loves to make money, and that's what he loves to do, good on him. But is he and is the wife, the spouse, are they being co-leaders? Are they helping the next generation understand what it's like to manage risk and what it's like to do things in a timely fashion? And if there's gaps in what they see as the skills, then what's the learning plan? What's the learning plan for mom and dad? Just like what Katie and her husband were talking about on your episode 81. And what's the learning plan for the next gen? And I'm a lifelong learner. I'm always learning, and I always will. And that's what I'd like to see for those 50-year-olds. So what's mom to do? First, mom needs to clarify what she wants. And then she also enacts, I think, Ben, the power of a letter. And I think she also should kidnap her husband and take him to Hawaii. And why I say that is I took my husband to Hawaii this year for 3.5 weeks. And we had family. We had the grandkids and our son and daughter-in-law join us for a week. And then we had 3 other couples join us, 2 other couples, which was lovely. And then we met some other people. And I said to my husband, how's the experiment going? And he looked at me and he said, what farm? I said, perfect. The experiment's working really well. So sometimes you need to get away from the busyness to be able to see the big picture.
I love that. How's the experiment going? I know I kidnapped my father last year, mum and dad, and took them to New Zealand. So my wife and I and our daughter Sophie and mum and dad got off the farm, and dad kicked and screamed and, and there's no time to go. We're busy. And we went, and he had a ball, an absolute ball. And it was funny when we got over there the first time we went over, he looked in the mirror and he came out and he said, gee, I look tired. And at the end of it, he came out and he said, gee, I don't look tired anymore. And it was a real paradigm shift for him.
Yeah. And again, that's also something that's helpful, I think, to what you just asked about the mom wanting to know about the children coming back and the father just being in grow mode. Father's going to be in grow mode anyway if he knows he has a successor coming back, because it's called the successor effect. It's actually a thing, is that you'll buy more land or equipment or diversify or intensify the operation to create more income. But the other thing I wanted to mention is in coaching, we have this thing called getting ready. So the cycle of renewal, there's a quadrant called getting ready. And getting ready is learning, networking, experimenting, and training. So where is it written that you have to do this forever? You can just try it out. Just like your dad tried out going on holiday to New Zealand, which is one of my favorite places in the world where my good friend Mandy lives. I've been to New Zealand twice for an entire month. Once because we had total crop disaster in Canada one year, and Wes was leaning in my office door and he says, how do you like to go to New Zealand for a month? I go, yes, because we had no grain to clean because we had no crop that year.
He kidnapped you.
Yeah, he kidnapped me. It was great. So again, what we're talking about, Ben, is creating possibility and option. And I think that's the adventure and the joy of the work that you and I do with farm families, is that you and I do not believe there are no options.
There's always an option.
Yeah, there's always options, but some people have never considered what those options might be.
It's interesting, Elaine. One of the things that I've found most powerful, I've done with, just one small area, was we will quite often turn around and have a discussion around generational aspirations. What do mum and dad want? And what we get them to do is we get mum and dad to say, well, what do we actually want? And we get mum to do it and dad to do it, and then mum and dad to get together and talk about that. And what do we want for the next generation? What are we actually looking for to get for them? And again, mum and dad come up with their separate ideas, but then we get the kids to do the same. What do you want out of your life? What are you looking for? And there's always some common themes. Most of the time, they're never saying we want money or land or cattle or machinery. They say we want responsibility, we want opportunity. But the one that quite often gives me goosebumps and can make a massive change is when parents are worried that their children are entitled and aren't willing to work for what they've got and don't really care about the parents that much, is actually when the kids sit down and say, well, what do you want for your parents? And they start saying things like, well, we want mum and dad to have some time off. We want to take the pressure off mum and dad. We want to let them enjoy their life a little bit more. And you see mum and dad sit there and their eyes are bulging out of their heads saying, we had no idea. We had no idea that's what our children want. So quite often, because I think that one of the number one fears that we see in the current generation is that their children will or are becoming entitled. And so that's a great way of getting clarity around whether they are or they're not. Obviously, it can be the opposite side when the kids don't really want anything for their parents, and that's a real struggle. But that also helps them start to change the way they think.
I had that happen in a family meeting where one of the sons said, well, it would just be so much easier, Dad, if you just up and die and I could get your $500,000 life insurance policy. And the mom just burst into tears and went running out of the room, because in that moment she realized that her son was only concerned about himself and the expensive toys he had purchased that he'd like to pay for.
And it does happen.
Yeah. And again, that's also a bit of the humor of God, I think, is that you might have 4 children with 4 different ideas of what's entitled, and a spender and a saver. And I always say in my seminars, I think you would all like to adopt the child that says, I want mom and dad to use whatever money they can to have the life they deserve, because they work so hard and we have time on our side and we don't want to be given everything, right? But you can't find out what's inside people's heads. We have another t-shirt. I actually put it on a t-shirt, Ben, and it says, love does not read minds. And that's why the work that you do and the work that I do is so important for facilitation in our coaching. And our coaching team is to help people really get out of their mind and out of their heads onto the table what they are actually thinking, feeling, needing, and wanting. I think it's time we had this conversation. I know I'm only 50 years old. I don't have heart attack, stroke, or cancer in my life, but I want to start to have time on our side to unfold a plan that's going to give us all what we really long for.
And it's a scary thing admitting to what we actually want sometimes.
Yeah, but why does that have to be hard? I think it should be celebrated. And there's a thing called buynothingforchristmas.org, I think, and that's kind of the stage I'm at. Like, we don't have need of anything physically in possession. And actually, we should also be grateful, because we are very privileged people to have capacity, right? What I want is peace in this world. The war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza and Israel and all over the world, like all of the things around us that in Australia and Canada, somehow we forget those things are even happening because we get so myopic about what is happening on our own farms, and forget that, that farmer in Ukraine that we sent some equipment to a few years, we don't even know if he's still alive.
Well, our worst day is our worst day, isn't it? This is the thing. I have conversations with families. Whatever the worst day has been in your life will give you context about how difficult life is. So these days, sometimes when someone goes on holidays and it rains, it's the worst thing that's ever happened to them. And yet I think back to quite often when I'm having a bad day, and I put in inverted commas bad day, I think back to my great-grandfathers. One was in Gallipoli, one was on the Western Front in the trenches for 4 years. And I think if I look at the problems that I've got, he would have gone through a terrible experience, but everything for the rest of his life would have just been easy, because you'd look back and go, life can always get worse.
And my uncle was in the RCAF and got shot down 3 times. So we all have stories. But if you take what you just said, there's another saying, comparison is a joy stealer. So as you're going through this transition process and you say, well, those people have it so easy and we have it so hard, how is that going to help you? I say it helps you if you can copy success and listen to the podcast that you have with your people who are very apt and skilled at focusing and executing and making great plans. You can copy that success. You can do the same thing and make it fit the actual dynamic of your family. But looking across the way and saying, oh, I wish I had that, well, that's not actually helping you get anything done.
It's also when you see the other person out there that thinks they've got everything perfect, or they've got all the opportunities. When you actually get behind the curtain, you realise that it isn't always what it appears.
And the Irish saying for that is every front door looks beautiful.
We have a saying here in Australia, you don't know who's wearing swimmers or not when they're at the beach until the tide goes out.
Yes, I've seen that. I think that's also a Warren Buffett quote too. You don't know who invested well until the tide goes out.
Excellent. Well, look, Elaine, I'm very conscious of your time. I know you're very much in demand. You've got a lovely podcast. What's one piece of advice you'd give a family if they're, I suppose around this conflict is probably a great one just to give some advice on. What's one piece of advice you give a family who are avoiding conflict because they love each other and they don't want it to, let's just say, spiral out of control, which is what I see a lot of families. What's that piece of advice you give them?
Well, there's this woman in Canada a very long time ago, Dr. Nikki Gerard, who wrote a study on 12 years, I think, long time study on farm stress. And the study was called What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Stronger. And her thesis was strong families communicate. Strong families stay connected to community so they don't isolate, and strong families celebrate. And that's kind of how I set up my first book called Planting the Seed of Hope. So my one piece of advice for the families listening to this is you love your family, you want family harmony and unity, and you want to have a good life. And sometimes we have to do hard things, and you know how to do hard things because you're a farmer. You do all kinds of hard things. But what you need to understand is that conflict that is well managed will not be destructive. So conflict can be positive, and if you can't do it by yourself, hire someone to help you keep the conversation safe and respectful so you can really find out what other people are thinking, feeling, needing, and wanting. And when you go through this process, you will feel like 50 pounds have been lifted off your shoulders because now you understand things that you were making assumptions for. And when I just speak this, Ben, I can see the family in the circle sitting around me. And I'm thinking of a family way back when I was a student coach, when I had to divide the brothers into one being the cattle farmer and the other one being the grain farmer and taking their own successors and going separate ways. And as the woman walked out of the room, she said, Elaine, thank you for giving me my husband back. And all we did was sit around a table and decide what was best for this family, what was best for that family, and why they felt that way. And the why, again, is a conflict tool called sharing your intent. My intent is not to bring you together to blow us up because we're going to have conflict. My intent is to find clarity around expectations, some certainty of timelines for agreements, and commitment to get this all done and to act so that our family can be a family, our farm can be a healthy, growing farm, and that the future looks bright for all of us. Now, does that not sound like a good thing? I think it does.
Bloody fantastic, Elaine.
Yes. You have to get the car out of neutral. You have to get that ute, you and your ute out of neutral so that you're actually in first gear.
Yeah, well, also you can't steer a parked car.
No, and you can't move a ship that isn't moving either. We all know that one as well. Anyway, Ben, it's been delightful to meet you. I hope that Sophie and her friends, or that you and Sophie and your wife can come and actually make snowballs here at the lake house. It would be awesome.
We'd love to do that, Elaine. Elaine, can you just tell everyone where they can find you? As I said, I'm a big fan of the podcast. Can you give everyone the details so they can go find it online?
Yeah, best thing to do is just go to your search bar and type in farmfamilycoach.com. That will give you my website, and also on YouTube, Farm Family Coach, on Instagram, Farm Family Coach. And I've been doing this work for over 30 years, Ben, so there's tons of content. We also have a membership site now that does group coaching 3 times a month. And if people would be interested in that, they just have to sign up for the wait list on my website. And I can coach you for free every Thursday. So podcasts come out on Tuesday and insights come out every other Thursday. And our coaching team is also here to do free discovery calls. And yes, we do work with folks in Australia. We just have to figure out the time difference. So I'm in the afternoon right now and you're early morning, but it all works out, doesn't it? So It's amazing how we can connect.
It is. And it's just amazing with the internet now, with Zoom, and we're using Riverside FM at the moment. We can see each other clear as a bell. And for me, I'm eternally grateful for the technological change, because it's changed my world, being able to talk to families and have family meetings when we're at different sides of the world or different parts of the country. So
yeah, that's right. So a shout out to everybody in Australia who already follows, and also in Tasmania, because I hope to get there in the next couple of years. So we'll see what happens. Bye for now.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next one. Well, that's a wrap on today's episode with Elaine. I hope you found her insights as valuable and inspiring as I did. I know I've just counted here, I've got 10 pages of notes, which I'm going to be keeping for future record. I think there's some absolute gold in there. Now, before we sign off, I want to leave you with 3 key takeaways that really stood out to me. Now, the first one is you have to embrace conflict as a pathway to clarity. I want you to think about conflict differently. And this is something I've really struggled in my family. We always avoid conflict to get swept under the rug. And so what Elaine said was, instead of avoiding difficult conversations, I want you to welcome them as an opportunity to uncover assumptions, clear the air, and strengthen family relationships. What I can tell you of dealing with families over the years is healthy conflict is a secret to success, because if it's handled well, it can lead to deeper understanding and harmony in both the family and the business. Now, you're probably going to need help to be able to do that for many of you, especially if conflict has got really bad over the years. But I want you to think about embracing conflict as a pathway for clarity. Number 2, start your transition planning early, or your succession plan, as we call it here in Australia. The number one thing is, don't wait until a crisis forces your hand. This happens to families all the time. They pop up and it's got worse and worse and worse until it forces their hand. You want to begin planning your farm's future when you're in your 40s and 50s, not till you're in your 60s and 70s. Now, if you're in your 60s or 70s, the best time to have started planning was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So get out there and start. But if you're in your 40s and 50s, this is the time you need to be thinking about creating your transition plan. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to start winding up and thinking, I'm coming to the end of my life. Quite the contrary. I'm 47. I'm in my prime. I'm in what I call the acceleration phase. This is the time of your life when you're going to get all the success you're looking for. But you also need to be thinking about your 10, 15-year, 20-year business plan. You need to be thinking about, how do we prepare yourself, prepare the business, and prepare the next generation well in advance. This gives you more options, reduces stress, and will in turn create a smoother handover down the track. Just remember, kicking the can down the road is only going to make it a bigger problem later on down the track. Now, the third thing is, which really resonated from Elaine, was, and I've talked to people about this many times before, is redefining what it means to be wealthy. Now, what Elaine said in there, what do you truly want to be rich in? Is it money or acres or breeders or the size of the tractors or the number of the tractors you're driving around? Or is it stronger family bonds? Is it better health? Is it more free time? Or is it the satisfaction of watching your next generation thrive? I want to be clear, financial strength is important, but real wealth is not just found in the balance sheet, but it's in the quality of the life and the quality of your relationships. And I can tell you right now, the mistake that a lot of young men make is they think, I've got to make more money and I've got more acres, or I get more money in my balance sheet. I don't want you to drop that, but I want you to balance it out with thinking about, what does real wealth actually mean? Now, I've said this a number of times on the podcast, but I've had the privilege of meeting with and being heavily involved with people close to the end of their life who are very successful. And I can tell you right now, the regrets they have, or the things they focus on at that point in their life, is the quality of their life and their relationships. So really redefine what it means to be wealthy. What do you truly want to be rich in? Now, if you want to learn more from Elaine, be sure to check out her website, the Farm Family Harmony and Farm Family Harmony podcast. All the links are in the description notes. As always, thanks for tuning in to the Wealth and Wisdom podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you share it with someone who you might feel will benefit from Elaine's wisdom. And don't forget to subscribe on wherever you listen, Apple Podcasts, etc., and drop us a review. We appreciate every bit of support, and the more support we get, the more people that hear the podcast. We get somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people every month checking in. The more we can help, the better, especially especially in this topic. So until next time, keep striving for clarity, stay open to tough conversation, and remember, wealth is about so much more than money. Take care.